Game Builder Studio.
Now, while the player is moving their mouse or their finger along the device up and down, we want to move the character along with that, and we only want to move it along the up and down the y-axis. So we're going to do that by adding a logic component or a rules component, and I'm going to call it logic touchdown. And we need to check to make sure that both the characters in the flying state, well, first we need to add a condition, a touchdown condition on, well, we want it to touch down, we want it to be triggered anywhere. So anywhere the player touches on screen. So I uncheck on entity, and I want to change, or rather, before I add that, I want to add a condition, another condition to check for a property. So we want to check the hero state for current state being flying, equal to flying. And we also want to add another condition to check the global state machine. We can go to global game state machine, current state. And we want to make sure that it is running. While the touch is down and the character is flying and the game is running, I want to constrain the Hungry Hero's position in the y-axis according to where the mouse or the touch value of the user's finger is. So I'm going to use a constrain property because I want it to constantly update, and I want to change the Hungry Hero spatial Y position, and I'm not going to use the position object. I'm just going to change the Y, and I'm going to use an expression. So we're going to write an expression for the Hungry Hero's current Y position to be subtracted from the Y position minus the game's touch, the first touch point, and the Y value of that touch point. And we want to multiply the result of subtracting the current Y position of the Hungry Hero and the touch point, and we're going to multiply that by 0.1, just to smooth that out. Instead of it just jerking and jumping to that position, it'll gradually move into place over time. I'll save that, and I'll just name this to constrain Y position. Let's give that a run. Now as I move my mouse up and down, the character follows. Now a nice touch as well would be to add rotation. As you move, you want the character to kind of point in the direction of the touch. I want the rotation to be constrained based on the angle of the current touch point. So I'm going to add another constraint property, action, and I'm going to constrain the Hungry Hero spatial rotation to an expression. And the expression will be negative the result of the Hungry Hero its current Y position minus the current touch point's Y position. And we're going to multiply this by 0.09. Because we don't want a lot of rotation, but we want it to rotate appropriately. Save that. And you'll notice if I click all the way up here, it'll rotate and it'll straighten up once it gets to the same horizontal line as the touch point. And it's a very smooth, gradual movement. That's what we want. The hero character needs to respond to the global game state changes. So now I'm going to create a local state machine or state logic component on this entity that's going to read from the global state machine, because we want the character to fly in from left to right when the game starts, and things like the flying state and the rotation need to be reset when the game is restarted. So I'll add the properties starting position X, and starting position Y, because we need to hard code these to reset the character back to its initial starting position. And I'll add a state logic map and call it logic game state. Now we want to reference the global game state object and the global game state machine itself. And let's do an initial mapping to the game started state. Now when the game is started, we want the character to start off screen. We want to change the position of the Hungry Hero spatial component. And we're going to use an expression to change the value. We want it to be, we're going to use the set point method. We want it to be off screen 400 pixels to the left in the x-axis, and we want to use the starting position property on the hero. The rotation also needs to be changed and reset to 0. So we're going to use the spatial's rotation property. I'm going to set that to 0. And we're also going to change the hero state on the hero state machine. We want to change the current state to flying. And we're going to use a string value for that. Now like I said before, we want to animate the character from off screen to on screen. So we set the initial position off screen 400 pixels, and we want to animate it or interpolate the position property. Spatial position, and we want it to go from off screen 400 pixels, and using the starting position Y. I'm going to copy that, I'm going to save this, and we want it to animate into the starting position X and starting position Y. That's where we want it to end up. Going to give it a duration of about 1.4. We're going to delay it about 0.4 seconds. And we only want it to do it once. And we can leave easing to linear. Let's add another mapping for the game over state, because we want the hero character to be in the dead state when the game is over. We're going to use a string value to set it to dead. Now this is very powerful, linking to a state machine on a global, kind of a global entity, because you can have a bunch of objects in your game, and they can all respond to, one change, state machine change on a global entity, and without having to replicate that code across all the different entities. Now the hero character has its own state machine, so let's set up the logic for the hero state changes. We're going to add a state logic map, and I'm going to call it logic hero state. And let's select the hero state machine, then we can map to the flying state, and we're going to just change the animation on the hero animations component when it enters the flying state. We want the character to start playing its flying animation, so we're going to change the property on the hero animation current animation name. We want to set it to a string called flying. When the hero character collides with a ship, it's going to take damage. It's going to lose a life. And we need to shake the screen, continuously rotate it, and drop it down the screen slightly. So I need to store the current position in a property, or the last position of the Y coordinate right before it's hurt. And I'm going to create a new mapping and map the hurt state logic, and we're going to set that property to the current. We're going to set the last position to a reference, the spatial Y coordinate. And we also want to play the hurt animation. And set it to a string called hurt. The hero character needs to fall towards the center of the screen no matter where it is, and it needs to reset itself back to flying. So I'm going to add in interpolate property action, and we want to animate the position on the spatial. We're going to start it at its current position. And we want to use an expression to set a point. We want to use the current. So I'll just type this self.spatial.x. We don't want to move it in the x, and we want to grab the screen's height. We want to divide that by 2. And that is where we want it to fall or rise when it's hurt, to the middle of the screen. I'm going to set the duration to about 0.3. Play count is 1, and we want to turn off run to completion. Run to completion will allow the animation to fully complete even if the action stops. We can leave that to linear. And we need an action on here to trigger a change property, because we want to reset the state on the character to the flying reset state, so it'll reset itself. So we're going to change the current state on the hero state machine to the string of flying reset. Save that. Save that. While the hero character is falling, we also want it to rotate continuously. So we're going to use a constrained property that will constantly update. And we're going to constrain the spatial's rotation value to an expression. And it's pretty much the spatial's current rotation, and we're going to increment it by about 60. Now we want to animate the character back into place after it's been hurt. So we want to map the flying reset state, and we're going to use an interpolate property action to animate its position. Select the position. I'm going to name this animate back into position. And I'm just going to type in the expression here. We're going to animate from its current position we're going to use the self.spatial. The current X position, and we want to use that property that we set on the entity when the character is hurt, and we're going to set it to the last position Y. We're going to set the duration to 0.3. Run to completion, we're going to leave that checked, play once, save that, and we also want to reset the rotation. Of the spatial. I'm going to set that to 0. Now every time the character gets hurt, it collides with a ship, it gets hurt, and automatically once the hurt animation is finished, it'll transition to the flying reset, which will then transition to the flying state. The last state that needs to be mapped is the dead state, where we want the character to fall off screen and continuously rotate. So we're going to map the dead state, and we're going to set the current animation on the character to the hurt animation. The label didn't set, so let's see. Make sure that it saves. We want to not use a change property, but I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to use a constraint property. Continuous rotation of the spatial's rotation property. We're going to use an expression and we're going to add 60 to that constantly so it could continue rotating. And we want the position of the character to animate off screen. So we're going to use the interpolate action. Going to grab the current. We're going to change the position property. Going to grab the spatial's current position. That's where it will start, and it will end 400 pixels off screen. Remember, the X coordinate never changes. We're only moving in the Y. And we want to grab the game screen's height. And we're going to add 400 pixels to that so it can end up off screen. I'm going to set the duration to 0.8. Play count is 1, and we want to uncheck run to completion.